What sails and raids and has long braids? Welcome back to another dark fantasy drawing tutorial. In this video, I'm going to teach you how to draw Vikings, of course in the dark fantasy art style. I'll first go through the basics of Viking armor and clothing, and then go through a step-by-step process of drawing a Viking, starting with simple shapes and guidelines. And in the end, I'll give you some drawing tips on how to draw a Viking in the dark fantasy art style. A courageous Viking will fight and win, however dull the blade. But fellow adventurer, I will need you to sharpen that pencil before we begin. Let's go. To draw a Viking, let's first understand what Vikings wore, their armor and clothing. Viking armor was made of iron or leather. Iron armor was expensive, so it was mostly used for armor protecting the critical areas, like the head and torso, with iron helmets and iron chainmail, while leather was mostly used for armor protecting the arms and legs, with leather straps. Vikings who couldn't afford iron chainmail would have padded leather armor for the torso, or at worst, no armor at all, but just a weapon and shield. But some vigorous Vikings purposely wore nothing at all to enter battle in a fearsome frenzy. I mean, not absolutely nothing, but just nothing for the torso. Under the armor would be clothing, V-neck t-shirts, or long sleeves. So in places where there isn't armor, you could see clothing under the armor. Sometimes you could see clothing on top of armor, with fur cloaks around the neck or across one shoulder to keep warm and dry on land or overseas, or with normal clothing layered on top of iron chainmail to reduce noise of the chainmail and to keep warm. In this case, a little chainmail armor could be visible under the sleeves. Now that we have a brief understanding about what Vikings wore, let's learn how to draw them, by first drawing the figure in simple shapes with a light sketch. Without having to go into too much detail in anatomy, draw the Viking in spheres and cylinders, focusing on the overall proportions of the body, so we can then add the details of the Viking in ease. Draw a sphere for the head, rib cage, shoulders, pelvis, and the joints, and draw the arms and legs in cylinders. Roughly draw the hands and feet in simple shapes, the hands in boxy shapes with round edges, and the feet with long and pointy edges. Remember what I said about focusing on the overall proportions, so take your time when drawing the figure in simple shapes, and correct the proportions in this early sketching stage. Now that we've made sure the length and proportions are all correct, we can start adding the details, starting with the helmet. To draw the helmet, I advise you to lightly draw the facial features first. Draw the center of the sphere for the guideline of the eyebrows. Erase the sides of the sphere and mark the guidelines for the hairline, nose, and chin. Draw in the chin with tapered lines and mark the mouth. Then lightly draw in the facial features. Now, starting at the eyebrows, draw a hemisphere with the top end slightly pointed, and draw a long rectangular nose guard at the front of the helmet. Draw hair at the sides of the face and a mustache with curved lines. Connecting the hair and mustache, draw the beard by drawing the silhouette with curved lines and filling in the beard with more curved lines. For the torso armor, first connect the head and rib cage by drawing the neck, and the rib cage and shoulders with a line. Also draw the traps with lines upwards from the shoulders to the neck. Now, draw the torso armor in iron chainmail by drawing a silhouette offset outwards of half of the upper arms, shoulders, and torso, with a large opening for the neck. Draw a waist belt and clothing showing under the chainmail at the neck area. Draw the texture of chainmail armor with zigzag lines intersecting. To give more depth, draw the zigzag lines separately for each sleeve and the torso. For the arms, from half of the upper arms to half of the lower arms, Draw clothing under the armor showing. Offset outwards with bumpy lines and draw clothing wrinkles in the folding areas at the front of the elbows. From half of the lower arms to the wrists, draw vambraces with cylinders tapering to the wrists, or leather straps tied around the lower arms with round lines wrapping around. I'll go with the straps. Draw a fur cloak, wrap around the neck with bumpy lines, covering the shoulders, and a belt across the torso starting under one side of the fur cloak. Erase the insides of the belt and fur cloak and the unnecessary guidelines, and redraw the erased parts. Draw one end of the waist belt, tuck in, and stick out. Below the belt, draw the rest of the chainmail offset outwards of the upper legs, covering the pelvis and a slight bit of the upper legs, swooping down and connecting between the legs, and draw in the texture of chainmail armor. For the legs, from below the chainmail armor down to the knees, draw clothing under the armor, showing. Offset outwards with bumpy lines, and draw clothing wrinkles in the folding areas at the back of the knees. Because gravity will pull down the clothing, offset the lower side of the leg more, and erase the unnecessary guidelines. From the clothing to the ankles, draw long boots for the lower legs with cylinders tapering in bumpy lines, and connect the feet drawn a little larger with round ends. Draw strings tied around the long boots, or, like the lower arms, wrap the lower legs with leather straps. For the weapons, I'll draw a shield and axe. Draw the shield under the arm so that the Viking is resting his arm on the shield. Lightly draw the shape of an oval several times, for the shield is a circle when at the front, but an oval in other angles. And when drawing an oval, marking the end points of the longest and shortest diameter of the oval can be helpful. Draw until you can lightly see the round shape of the shield. Erase the leg behind the shield, and now, following the round shape, draw the oval in one clear stroke. Draw the hand resting on the shield with a rectangle with a round line at the end for the back of the hand, and draw the fingers each in 3 small cylinders tapering with the end of the cylinders round. Draw the thumb slightly sticking out at the side of the hand. Draw the little finger shortest, and the fingers gradually more bent towards the little finger, because that's how the fingers look when the hand is relaxed. Draw the other hand with a rectangle with a round line at the end and a triangle. Draw the thumb on the triangle in 2 cylinders with the end round. Draw a line in the center of the rectangle to show the side of the hand, and draw 3 cylinders for each finger so that 1 goes up and 2 down, drawing a slightly clenched fist. For the axe, draw a slot attached to the waist belt, and the wooden handle downwards. Draw the blade of the axe with the wooden handle slightly sticking out at the top, and finish it with a slanted end. Now, let's draw the Viking in more detail. Draw 2 lines down the middle of the helmet, and a line at the bottom of the helmet, and make the nose guard pointed. Extend the lines down, and add bolts to the bottom of the helmet. Offset inwards the nose guard and top of the helmet, and add more bolts at the top. Finish the helmet with lines coming down the sides. Draw braided hair with 2 curves curving inwards repeatedly, coming down at the sides of the face, and wrinkles around the eyes and nose with lines going towards the area between the eyebrows. Draw the bottom of the nose, and draw more curved lines for the mustache and beard. For the fur cloak, draw the texture of fur with light lines drawn outwards at the edges of the cloak, and the fur in the center of the cloak in smaller dotted lines gradually getting longer towards the edges. Draw a circular clasp and buckle at the top of the belt across the torso, and offset lines inwards of the belt. Draw more clothing wrinkles for the clothing, and extend the boundaries of the clothing with bumpy lines to draw thicker legs. Erase the boundary of the waist and draw it slightly slimmer. Extend the boundaries of the clothing, leather straps, and chainmail of the arms to draw thicker arms, and draw some straps draped down on the arm resting on the shield. Draw clothing wrinkles for the boots too. Draw a metal rim for the wooden shield by offsetting inwards the oval. And let's break off part of the shield and draw wooden points sticking out at the broken edges. Draw a round metal piece at the center of the shield, and lines parallel with the wooden points sticking out for the texture of a wooden shield. Now for the final touches. Erase the unnecessary lines of the first sketch and lightly shade in the dark areas under the main light source, being the sun, right above the Viking. Shade in the edges of the helmet, the face under the helmet, and the neck. Also, shade in the bottom areas of the hands and arms, and slightly shade under the chest and waist to give depth to the torso. Shade the axe and waist belt, and the bottom areas of the legs with lines similar with the texture of clothing wrinkles, and shade the shield under the round metal piece and resting arm. Draw some scratches and dirt from fighting in battle at the helmet, axe blade, and the wooden shield. Once more, shade the leg under the shield, the chainmail area between the legs, and under the belt. And draw a simple design for the shield by shading in two sides of 4 equally divided sections. For Viking shield designs, were mostly rotated or mirrored designs. Lastly, draw a matching background of a Viking leaning on some ancient rocks, taking a rest after a fierce battle. And we are done. Since you've all given this video a like and subscribe, if you haven't already, I'll give you 2 seconds right now to subscribe. Here are 4 tips on drawing Vikings in the dark fantasy art style. Tip number 1. When drawing the helmet, draw the face first, then the helmet. Because if you draw the helmet first and then the face, you'll have a hard time drawing the face, especially the eyes. Because drawing the facial features is easier without anything on the face interfering. So rather, simply draw the face with guidelines in a light sketch first, and then draw the helmet. Note that you might not be seeing some parts of the face due to being covered under the helmet. So simply draw the face, then the helmet, and then the visible parts of the face in detail. Tip number 2. Vikings were aesthetic and decorative, skilled in arts and crafts. So Vikings had neatly braided hair for their long hair or beards. When drawing braided hair, draw the hair in 2 curves curving inwards repeatedly, gradually getting smaller with the ends of the curves not touching. Draw a hair band at the end of the braids and the rest of the hair sticking out in curves at the very end. You can also draw beads in between braided hair for a more aesthetic look. Likewise, Vikings had shiny accessories like necklaces and arm rings, high up at the upper arms. When drawing shiny accessories, use an eraser and erase the dark areas. Then draw with a freshly sharpened pencil to draw bright and shiny texture with thin and defined lines. With a dull pencil, you're going to draw dull accessories. Tip number 3. Use your eraser to draw Vikings' breath visible in cold weather. To draw the breath showing in cold weather, use your eraser and erase the front of the face, around the mouth and nose. Also, erase a little more farther away, slightly. Then redraw parts that were accidentally erased. Use this tip to portray cold and chilled environments and atmospheres. Lastly, tip number 4 is to only draw horned or winged helmets more for a fantasy character, not a realistic one, as the horns weren't the best for battle because enemies could grab it, and winged helmets would just be making the helmet heavier. But that's all realistic knowledge. When it comes to drawing fantasy characters, especially dark fantasy, horned and winged helmets gave a more powerful and cool look. Horned helmets gave a dark fantasy feel, and winged helmets a bright fantasy feel. Keep this in mind and play around with different helmet designs when drawing Vikings in the dark fantasy art style. We have come a long way. I see your pencils have become dull, but the skill within is mastery about to begin. Wait, what? I don't even know what that means. I guess that's enough dark fantasy for today. Anyways guys, I hope you all had fun drawing Vikings, and I'll see you on the next one. Let's get better together. Take it easy guys, and God bless.